Hi everybody, welcome to I finally tricked all my friends into playing Guild Wars with me.
Well, I hope you have a good idea of what you're going to get out of that.
It only took almost 20 years. That's not a joke. The 20th anniversary of this game is in like several weeks.
Alright, just gonna want to get this on record. My experience with Guild Wars is as follows. I read the review in Computer Gaming World. That's it.
Fantastic.
As in, I had a physical issue of Computer Gaming World that explained what Guild Wars was and said if they liked it or not. And I think this might be the only review of any video game between, like, 1990 and 2005 where I don't have a good idea if they liked it or not. The last time I played an MMO, almost the last session I played an MMO, a 15-year-old kid who had just stolen a bottle of liquor from a liquor store panicked and confessed to me and asked me for advice under the assumption that I was like 30 when I myself was 17. So that's 2 weeks before that. He looked at my inventory and threw up and said, "What the fuck are you doing? Did an idiot pick out this character stuff?" So that's the level
this is
we're
online.
aspiring to.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
I was like, wait a minute. I met you when you were like 18 or 19. You did not look like a 30-year-old then.
I know. I ran a guild as a 17-year-old. In person, I was getting asked if I was like still in middle school, and online, I discovered one day that all of the members of my guild thought that I was like a real estate agent or something.
Something similar happened to me where I was very young, but I had this voice forever, and everybody thought I was like a 40-year-old chain smoker or some shit. No, I'm much younger than that.
Just bitter.
Okay, so in order to play Guild Wars together, we need to make a couple of decisions first. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into the character creation menu here and kind of go through this step by step. And it is going to be all of us playing together rather than everyone just watching me play the game solo, although this game is totally viable to play solo if you wanted to, which is mostly what I've been
brought
doing
me
with it
on
for
to
the past
carry
20 years.
Viable to play solo, says Josh.
Yeah, no, I'll get into it later, but this game is actually very highly oriented towards being able to play it solo, especially nowadays. Probably the reason why there's still a population at all is that everybody can play it without having to be around other players, which is one of those fun little quirks of MMOs. Anyway, so yeah, you can create a PvP-only character to play the PvP modes, which I believe are just mostly infested by bots at this point. We're going to play a role-playing character. That's your typical MMO character. So this is a big choice we have to make. Guild Wars has 3 campaigns. Each of these campaigns has a full level 1 to max level, which is actually just level 20, experience in it. So they each have their own tutorial zone and their own storyline. So in order to play the game together, we need to decide which campaign we're going to start in. Okay. This is also important because there are 10 classes in Guild Wars, and once you pick your primary class, you can't change it, and it defines certain aspects of your character that you will want to like know ahead of time.
Far out.
And there are 6 like base professions. And then each additional new campaign added 2 professions that are specific to that campaign. So,
right.
And I should point out that profession and class should be considered synonymous here.
Right, so you're getting all this for your spread.
Yeah. So, Prophecies is the original Guild Wars campaign. It's the campaign the game launched with, and it's kind of the main setting. Like, each of these campaigns takes place on a different continent. When Guild Wars 2 came out, it was the Prophecies continent. It is by far the longest campaign. There are 25 cooperative missions, and cooperative missions are these sort of big instance storyline quests that take about an hour each to complete. So chances are, unless we really, really like this and everybody really, really likes this format, we're not going to finish Prophecies. Aside from that, it's probably got the biggest biome diversity, but it is also kind of the oldest and, in some ways, the clunkiest of the campaigns. Factions is the campaign that was added next. It is the Asian Smorgasbord campaign, and it is, like, by far the shortest. By comparison, there are 14 versus the 25 cooperative missions in Factions, and you only have to finish 12 of them in a playthrough because 2 of them are, like, branching.
Don't you hit, like, level 12 out of the tutorial island in Factions?
No, you hit level 20 out of the... Yeah, so Factions is very fast by comparison to either the other 2 campaigns. If we're gonna finish a campaign, it'll be Factions. That said, I think Factions is probably the worst campaign, both in terms of its art direction, which, like... It probably has the least biome diversity of any of the campaigns, and the biome that you're in the most is basically, you know, Kowloon Walled City. What if that were just half a continent? So you're running around, like, corrugated, rusty metal environs for, like, 60% of the campaign.
I think just generally a vibes-based pass on Factions.
Sorry, say that again?
I said, I think generally a vibes-based pass on Factions.
Yeah. It also has, like, again, probably the worst story and some of the most incredibly bad voice acting I've ever seen. Just...
tempting, but I'll stand by my decision.
Real goofy shit. And then there's Nightfall. Nightfall was the last of the campaigns to be released. It is the African and Middle Eastern expansion. In terms of story, I think it tells the most coherent storyline, and it is about in the middle between Factions and Prophecies in terms of length. There are 20 cooperative missions in Nightfall, of which you have to complete 17. It has sort of most of the most modern features in the game. The art is also more modern. However, it is basically all just tropical rainforest, island, desert, savanna, like African and Middle Eastern, you know, hot area kind of biome. So if you're not really into a whole bunch of desert stuff, like, the game can kind of feel samey.
All right.
And if I may add to that, it also feels like the one that's most close to more traditional MMOs in that, like, I find the quests to be less engaging. At least the side quests. I probably am in the minority there, but there's lots of running around and killing 17 things to get the loot so that you can go and talk to some.
Okay, yeah, there is quite a bit of that in the tutorial area. I wouldn't say Prophecies or Factions are particularly less in that, but maybe a little bit more in Nightfall's beginning stuff.
But Prophecies felt like they were really trying to tell the story at the very beginning, whereas Nightfall feels loaded up with a lot more gameplay in the beginning. I don't know. That's just my personal...
I'm gonna say Prophecies probably is the thing that makes the most sense to me.
What do you think, Chris?
Prophecy sounds good.
Yeah,
but if we
that
go
was
to
actually going to be my
Prophecies,
suggestion
we don't get
afterwards. Like myself, I just wanted to see where your take was, but yeah. So that is the thing: is we won't get access to Assassin, Ritualist, Paragon, or Dervish. So if those sound like cool classes, you should say something now.
I stand by my ill-informed decision to start with the most basic version of this game.
Right. Okay. So we have access to 6 classes here, and we do need to kind of figure out what classes everyone is playing. I'm going to quickly summarize each of the classes here and then explain kind of what's going on here. But basically, we have two martial. Yeah, we have two martial classes. Warrior is your melee knight in a bunch of armor. It's your fighter. Primarily, the role of the warrior is to get out in front, do a bunch of mainly single target damage, spread conditions, and tank with a great big asterisk, because when I say tanking, it doesn't really work in this game like you might expect. There are no taunt mechanics. There's no aggro manipulation in that way. So it's much more about positioning and just kind of getting out there in front of the party before the rest of the party is in range for the enemy party to aggro, and then just kind of physically placing yourself in between the enemy and the rest of the party. But they are like very survivable and hardy in that way. Ranger is your ranged archer class. They have bows. They have a little bit of nature magic, and then also Ranger is the pet class. And like the vast majority of Ranger builds bring a pet. You don't have to bring a pet. That isn't absolutely something you have to do as a Ranger, but usually like the added DPS of just having a pet companion is better than not taking one. Ranger has better armor against elemental damage versus warrior against physical, so spellcasters are less effective against Ranger than they are against warriors. Their damage is a bit less impressive than warriors, both just as a balancing thing because they're a ranged class, but also because like they use bows, and bow mechanics in this game are surprisingly complicated. For example, bows can miss. Like, the enemy can dodge your shots. This is not aiming like an FPS, but like if an enemy is running like at an oblique angle to you at enough speed, like you can miss. But Ranger's pretty versatile and highly survivable. And then we have the first of our four spellcasters. Now, Monk, you might look at and think, oh, okay, I know D&D, I know what a monk is. That's not what a monk is in this game. Monk is your white mage. It is the healer class. Monk has healing abilities to just give you HP back. They can also use protection spells that enchant party members with various protective effects to mitigate damage. And finally, they have some minor damage and party support with their smiting prayers line, but the damage a monk is going to do is always going to be secondary to their healing.
I would be delighted to know what the rationale in calling him a monk is, considering the things that generally distinguish a monk from not a monk. I don't know.
It's important to note that the developers of Guild Wars largely came out of like Blizzard, out of like the Diablo 2 team. Like they had Diablo 2 alumni when they were building this game, and this game is actually like there's a lot of shared DNA with Diablo 2. It's not out and out a Diablo clone by any means, but so I think it wasn't them thinking from the tradition of Dungeons and Dragons when they decided to make it monk. Following that, we have Necromancer. Necromancer does usually one of two things. One is it uses curses and hexes to debilitate the enemy and steal health as a form of doing damage. And then the other one is Necromancers can be minion masters. Necromancers can summon minions from the corpses of fallen enemies or allies, and basically make up little armies of really dumb but adorable little meatbags that run around and hit
not
stuff.
Dumb,
and
they're misunderstood.
You can also enchant them with things that make them explode when they die, so that's fun. There's a whole subcategory of Minion Master builds called Minion Bombers. If you think about the Diablo 2 Necromancer, the Guild Wars Necromancer is pretty similar. Mesmer, shown here with a sword. They do not use swords. They do get a sword, but only 15 years after the game came out, and only one of them.
The sword is an illusion.
I mean, that's
Mesmers are... is a rapier not a sword, Retscar?
It is a sword. I'm just being derisive. I actually study rapier. That's the weapon I'm learning.
How accurate would you describe this cross hilts?
Vibes. Yes, that is pretty much what they be like.
Yeah.
I'm not standing by that.
Which is not to say you actually couldn't put a sword on a Mesmer. It's just there's not really any synergy for doing that. Anyway, Mesmer is your illusionist mage. You're like, you're kind of more tricky side of a wizard. Mesmers are very heavily oriented towards debilitating enemies and shutting down the ability for enemies to act. They can actually do a surprising amount of damage in this. In fact, between Mesmer and Elementalist, like they're kind of in a dead heat at like endgame builds in terms of like what a player Mesmer and a player Elementalist can actually do in terms of DPS. But Mesmer's damage is usually a lot more conditional. It requires a pretty solid understanding of the game mechanics in order to play well. So it's probably the least beginner-friendly class here. Finally, Elementalist is I cast Fireball. It's the big AoE damage class par excellence. They do have some party support, particularly in the earth and water magic lines, but for the most part, as an Elementalist, if you're not doing damage, you're probably not playing the class right. And that's your 6 classes here. Now, I point all of this out because the group size, once we get out of the tutorial zone, for most of the early game is 4. So since there's 4 of us, at least one of us will have to be a healer. Now, that probably means Monk, although if you really wanted to in a pinch, Necromancer can be a pretty decent healer with Monk secondary. And I will explain the secondary stuff later on.
I was initially thinking Necromancer.
Oh boy, yeah, go Necromancer. No, everyone should enjoy Necromancer.
Listen, okay, I will say 2 things. Number 1, obviously, intuitively, I looked at the screen and it's like Necromancer is the worst possible choice for someone in my position. However, and I stand by this, when it comes to picking an RPG class, you really don't want to deliberate about it because it just sucks the magic right out of it. Sometimes you just need to take on a homework assignment, and that's okay.
Oh, you're in for a great homework assignment if you pick Necromancer. I highly recommend.
It is Glitch's like signature class in this game. He always plays Necromancer when he can.
Not that I need to this time. I played it plenty.
So
I was gonna volunteer to be Monk if no one else wanted to be, but I do think it would be funny to make Chris. Yeah.
All right. Ideally, we should also have a like frontline melee character, which warrior. You can also do a ranger warrior and run around with your pet and a hammer or whatever.
Well, it sounds like it's just you and me, Josh.
Yeah, so what are you thinking?
I'll be Elementalist.
I mean, okay.
No, I actually would like to try Warrior out.
Okay.
That is what I was going to pick originally, so it works.
I was thinking about playing Mesmer because it's probably my least played class. I haven't played a Mesmer seriously in a very long time, so... Okay, that only took 20 minutes or so, so we can actually kind of get started here. Yeah. So we're gonna go through character creation here, and so there is a little quibble, which is the tutorial zone has a max group size of 2. So basically, I think the way we should do this is me and one other person do the remaining 40 minutes of this session or so in the tutorial zone together, and then our 2 odd men out get to do that off screen. We'll probably be in the tutorial zone through to next week at some point. There's a few quests to do, but it shouldn't take all that long.
Okay, so it's like a 2-week segment where it'll be just 2 people playing, probably. Okay.
Yeah.
I have no strong opinions.
Fortunately, the whole, we need a healer component is actually not really the case in the tutorial zone because everything's super easy, so... it could be you and me, Ruts, or...
I'm sitting at character creation. If I create this character, will I just go to the same server you're in?
Yeah.
Alright, I'm ready to go when you are, then, I guess.
Fantastic.